The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal towers of the Galactic Military Academy on Kepler Prime. Commander Ziegler walked through the halls with his usual confident stride, his blue skin gleaming under the artificial lights. Today would be different from all the other days. Today, he would introduce something new to his students. The Academy had trained officers from 12 different alien species for over 300 years. Wars in the galaxy were not like the old stories. They were clean, organized, and civilized. When two planets had a problem, they would meet in space with their fleets. They would fight according to the rules that everyone knew. When one side lost too many ships, they would surrender. The winners would take what they wanted, and everyone would go home. Nobody wanted to waste lives or destroy entire worlds. Ziegler entered classroom 7, where 24 young aliens sat waiting for their morning lesson. They came from all over the galaxy. Some were tall and thin, others short and wide. Some had scales, others had fur. But they all shared one thing. They believed they knew everything about war. Veltar sat in the front row, his long tentacles wrapped around his datapad. He came from Zentari, where military strategy was considered an art form. His people could win battles by moving their ships in beautiful patterns that confused enemies without firing a single shot. Veltar was proud of his heritage and often reminded others that Centaurians had never lost a war. Behind him sat Kixlin, her blue-green skin shining with moisture from the small water tank built into her chair. Her people from Hydros settled fights by showing their strength through elaborate dances and displays. They rarely hurt each other. When they did fight, it was more like a contest than a real battle. The strongest would win, and everyone would. Except the result dot in the back corner, Buzik clicked his mandibles softly as he reviewed his notes. The insectoid came from a hive world where millions of his kind thought and acted as one. When the collective went to war, it was like watching a chess game played with living pieces. Every move was calculated. Every loss was measured. If the cost became too high, they would simply stop fighting and find another solution. Near the window, Morgak sharpened one of his claws on a small stone. His people from Drakmor were the closest thing the galaxy had to warriors, but even they followed strict rules. Battles were fought between volunteers. Civilians were never involved. When enough honor had been gained or lost, the fighting would end. War was about proving strength, not destroying enemies. The smallest student in the class was Sylphia, whose people had not fought a war in over 1,000 years. The Harmony Circle had perfected the art of avoiding conflict entirely. They could talk their way out of any problem and find peaceful solutions to every dispute. Sylphia was only studying military history to understand what her people had evolved beyond. Commander Ziegler activated the holographic display at the front of the classroom. A three-dimensional image of a blue and green planet appeared, slowly, rotating in the artificial light. "Students," Ziegler began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in 3 different wars. "Today, we begin a new chapter in your education. The humans have recently joined our Galactic Federation, and as part of our cultural exchange program, we will study their military history." Several students shifted in their seats. The humans were new to space travel and seemed primitive compared to most galactic civilizations. Their technology was basic, their ships were crude, and their weapons seemed almost ancient. Many of the students wondered what they could possibly learn from such a young species. Veltar raised one of his tentacles. "Commander, what can humans teach us about warfare?" "Our intelligence reports show that their military technology is several centuries behind galactic standards." Ziegler smiled, but there was something strange in his expression. "That is an excellent question, Cadet Veltar. You will find that humans approach warfare very differently than we do." The commander touched a control, and the planet disappeared. In its place came an image of human soldiers. They wore simple uniforms and carried weapons that fired small metal projectiles instead of energy beams. Their armor looked heavy and uncomfortable compared to the lightweight protection used by most galactic militaries. These images are from what humans call World War I, fought on their home planet over a century ago, Ziegler explained. We will begin with this conflict because it demonstrates several important aspects of human military thinking. Kixlin's gills fluttered with curiosity. How many ships were involved in this space battle, Commander? There were no ships, Cadet Kixlin. This entire war was fought on the surface of their planet. The students looked confused. Wars fought on planetary surfaces were rare in galactic history. Most civilizations had moved their conflicts to space long ago to avoid damaging their worlds. Fighting on a planet meant risking cities, farms, and civilian populations. It was considered wasteful and uncivilized. Buzz-Ek clicked his mandibles. Commander, if this was a surface war, surely it was a small conflict between neighboring regions? Perhaps a dispute over resources or territory? Ziegler's expression grew more serious. This war involved most of their planet. Over 65 million humans participated in the fighting. The war lasted 4 years and resulted in approximately 17 million deaths. The classroom fell silent. In 3 centuries of galactic warfare, total casualties for all conflicts combined were less than 1 million. The idea of a single war killing 17 million beings was beyond their understanding. Sylphia spoke in a whisper. Surely those numbers are incorrect, Commander. No intelligent species would continue fighting after such losses. The numbers are accurate, Ziegler replied. And this was not even their largest war. We will study that conflict next week. He activated the video display, and the first footage began to play. The students saw human soldiers living in long ditches dug into the earth. The trenches were filled with mud, water, and worse things. Men sat in these horrible conditions for months at a time, waiting for orders to attack. The aliens watched in fascination as the primitive humans used their simple weapons. The projectile rifles seemed quaint compared to plasma weapons, but the students were taking notes and making comparisons to their own military equipment. Then the artillery started. The video showed massive explosions erupting across a barren landscape. Shells fell like rain, each one creating a crater large enough to hide a small building. The bombardment continued for hours, turning the ground into a moonscape of mud and destruction. Veltar's tentacles began to curl with distress. In Zentarian warfare, such widespread destruction was avoided at all costs. Battles were won through elegant maneuvers and precise strikes. The idea of simply destroying everything in sight seemed wasteful and barbaric. The video continued, showing human soldiers climbing out of their trenches and walking across the devastated ground toward enemy positions. Machine guns opened fire, cutting down hundreds of men in minutes. Yet more soldiers kept coming, stepping over the bodies of their fallen comrades. Pause the video, Kixlin gasped, her gills fluttering rapidly. Commander, this footage must be corrupted or altered somehow. No military commander would order soldiers to walk into certain death. Ziegler stopped the playback. The footage is completely authentic, Cadet Kixlin. This particular attack was the first day of the battle. Of the sum, the British Army suffered 60,000 casualties in a single day. Buzz-Ek's compound eyes dilated in shock. In collective warfare, losing even 100 individuals was considered a disaster requiring immediate surrender and peace negotiations. The idea of accepting 60,000 casualties as the cost of a single day's fighting was incomprehensible. But why did they continue? Morgak asked, his warrior instincts struggling to understand such tactics. After the first wave failed, why send more soldiers? Because, Ziegler said quietly, Humans do not fight wars the way we do. They do not stop when the cost becomes high. They do not surrender when victory seems impossible. They fight until they win, or until they have nothing left to fight with. The commander looked around the classroom at his students' shocked faces. Tomorrow, we will continue with more footage from this war. I suggest you prepare yourselves. What you have seen today is only the beginning. The next morning, only 18 students sat in classroom 7. 6 cadets had requested transfers to different courses overnight. Word had spread through the academy about the disturbing human war footage, and many students were asking their friends what they had witnessed. Commander Ziegler noticed the empty seats but said nothing. He had expected this reaction. He activated the holographic display and waited for the remaining students to settle down. Most of them looked nervous, unsure of what horrors they would see today. Veltar sat in his usual front row seat, but his tentacles were wrapped tightly around himself. He had barely slept the night before, his mind replaying the images of humans walking into machine gun fire. In his dreams, he saw thousands of soldiers falling in the mud, only to be replaced by thousands more. Kixlin had spent the evening in her water tank, trying to wash away the memory of what she had seen. Her people resolved conflicts through displays of strength and beauty, not through mass slaughter. The idea that an intelligent species would accept such terrible losses was keeping her awake at night. Buzak had reported the previous day's lesson to his hive mind. The collective consciousness had spent hours analyzing the footage, trying to understand the logic behind human tactics. They had reached no conclusions. The human behavior seemed to contradict every principle of rational warfare. Today, Commander, Ziegler began, we will continue studying World War I, but we will also examine how humans fought in different environments and conditions. The holographic display showed a map of Earth with red marks indicating battle locations. There were dozens of them, scattered across continents and islands. The students realized that this single war had touched almost every part of the human world. The first footage comes from the Eastern Front, where humans fought in temperatures that reached 40 degrees below freezing. The video began with images of soldiers trudging through deep snow. Their breath formed clouds in the bitter air, and ice covered their weapons and equipment. The aliens watched human troops attacking enemy positions in conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. Sylphia shivered in her climate-controlled chair. Her people lived in perfect environmental conditions and avoided any physical discomfort. The idea of choosing to fight in such terrible weather seemed like madness. The footage showed human soldiers digging trenches in frozen ground, their hands bleeding from the cold and effort. When they attacked, they ran across snow-covered fields while enemy bullets whistled around them. Many fell and did not get up, their blood staining the white ground red. The human body is not designed for such cold, Ziegler explained. Yet they continued fighting for months in these conditions. Many died from the weather itself, but their armies never retreated. The next video took them to a completely different environment. Now the humans were fighting in blazing desert heat, their uniforms soaked with sweat. Sand got into everything, their weapons, their food, their eyes. The sun was so bright that it hurt to look at the screen. Morgak leaned forward with interest. His people were tough and could survive in harsh conditions, but even they would struggle in such extreme environments. Yet the humans in the video seemed to accept the suffering as normal. This is the Arabian Peninsula, Ziegler said. Humans fought here in temperatures exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. Water was scarce, and sandstorms could last for days. Yet, they continued their campaigns. The footage showed human soldiers attacking a fortified position while artillery shells exploded around them. Sand and smoke filled the air, making it impossible to see more than a few meters. The aliens watched in amazement as humans advanced through this chaos, guided only by compass bearings and determination. Then came the footage that would haunt several students for years to come. The video showed a place called Verdun, where humans had been fighting over the same piece of ground for 10 months. The battlefield looked like another planet. Every tree was gone, every building destroyed. The ground was nothing but shell craters filled with muddy water and the bodies of the dead. Veltar made a sound of distress as he watched human soldiers living in this wasteland. They slept in holes dug into crater walls. They ate food mixed with dirt and drank water that tasted of death. Disease spread through their ranks, but still they fought. The Battle of Verdun lasted 300 days. Ziegler said quietly, "Over 700,000 humans became casualties fighting for a city that no longer existed." The phrase they used was, "They shall not pass." Kixlin's gills were fluttering so rapidly that she was hyperventilating. "Commander, please stop. The video. This cannot be real. No species fights over dead ground. When a position becomes untenable, you withdraw and find better terrain." "Humans do not always withdraw," Ziegler replied. "Sometimes they decide that a position must be held regardless of cost. Sometimes they fight for symbols rather than strategic value." Buzik was clicking his mandibles in agitation. "But the losses, Commander. In 10 months of fighting, they lost more soldiers than our entire collective military. How could their civilization survive such bleeding?" The commander changed the video to show human factories working day and night, producing weapons and equipment. Millions of humans who were too old or too young to fight were working to supply the armies. Women operated machinery that had previously been handled only by men. Children collected scrap metal to be turned into ammunition. Their entire civilization focused on the war effort, Ziegler explained. Every human contributed in some way. They called it total war, the complete commitment of a society to victory. The concept was alien to most galactic civilizations. Wars were fought by professional soldiers, while civilian populations continued their normal lives. The idea of involving entire planets in military conflict was considered barbaric and wasteful. The next footage showed something even more disturbing. Human soldiers were attacking positions defended by their own species. Humans fighting humans, with the same terrible determination they had shown against foreign enemies. "Civil war?" Sophia whispered. "Revolution," Ziegler corrected. When part of the human military rebelled against their government, both sides fought with equal brutality. Brothers killed brothers. Fathers fought sons. Yet neither side would surrender. The classroom was becoming quieter as more students realized the implications of what they were seeing. These humans did not just fight foreign enemies with such determination. They fought each other the same way. More footage followed, showing different battles from the same war. Humans fighting in mud, so deep that wounded soldiers drowned in it. Poison gas attacks that left men blind and choking, yet survivors continued fighting. Artillery bombardments that lasted weeks, turning forests into splinter-filled wastelands. Through it all, the humans never seemed to reach a breaking point where they would simply stop fighting. Other species would have negotiated peace after the first major battle. The humans fought for 4 years and only stopped when one side could no longer field an army. Veltar was the first to leave. He stood up suddenly, his tentacles shaking, and walked quickly toward the door. His proud warrior culture had never experienced anything like what he had just witnessed. Centaurian battles were artistic displays of tactical skill, not grinding. Wars of attrition. 3 more students followed him out of the classroom. They could not process what they had seen. Their minds rejected the idea that any species could be so determined, so willing to sacrifice everything for victory. Kixlin remained in her seat, but her gills had stopped fluttering. She sat perfectly still, staring at the frozen image on the screen. Her people settled disputes through beautiful displays and graceful competitions. The ugly, brutal reality of human warfare was the opposite of everything she had been taught about conflict resolution. Commander Ziegler looked at the remaining 14 students. Half of his class was gone, and he had not even shown them the footage from World War II yet. That conflict would make World War I look small by comparison. Tomorrow, he announced, we will study how human warfare evolved over the next 20 years. I warn you now, what you have seen today was only the beginning. The humans learned from this war and developed new ways of fighting that were even more intense. Bazek raised one of his arms. Commander, with respect, why are we studying this? These tactics would never work in modern galactic warfare. Our rules of engagement prevent such brutality. Ziegler's expression became very serious. Because, Cadet Bazek, rules only work when both sides agree to follow them. What happens when you face an enemy who does not care about your rules? What happens when you encounter opponents who fight like humans? The question hung in the air as the remaining students filed out of the classroom. None of them had an answer, but all of them were beginning to understand that their peaceful galaxy might not stay peaceful forever. Outside the classroom, groups of students gathered in the hallways, talking in hushed voices about what they had witnessed. Some were angry, calling human warfare primitive and barbaric. Others were frightened, realizing that their own military training might be inadequate against such determined opponents. But a few students, like Morgak and the remaining members of the class, were beginning to ask different questions. Only 10 students remained in Classroom 7 on the third day. The empty seats seemed to echo with the absence of their former classmates. Commander Ziegler had received formal complaints from 3 different species representatives, demanding that the human warfare curriculum be removed from the academy program. The Centaurian ambassador had called the footage disturbing propaganda that serves no educational purpose. The Idros Council had submitted a petition signed by 200 parents requesting that their children be protected from such violent material. Even the normally tolerant Harmony Circle had expressed concerns about the psychological impact on their students. But Commander Ziegler had his orders from the Academy Board. The human military exchange program would continue as planned. Veltar was gone, along with most of the other proud military students. Only the most curious or stubborn cadets remained. Kixlin sat in her usual seat, but she had requested special permission to have a counselor present during the lessons. Bazek remained because his hive mind was determined to understand human warfare, no matter how disturbing it became. Morgak had not missed a single day. The Drakmor warrior was fascinated by human tactics, even though they violated every principle of honorable combat his people valued. Sylphia surprised everyone by staying in the class, despite her people's pacifist nature. She claimed she needed to understand what her civilization might face if humans ever became enemies instead of allies. Today we move forward in human history, Commander Ziegler announced. 20 years after World War I ended, humans began an even larger conflict. They called it World War II. The holographic display showed a map of Earth with far more red markers than before. This war had touched every continent and involved every major human nation. The scale was beyond anything the remaining students had imagined possible. This war lasted 6 years, Ziegler continued. It involved over 100 million human soldiers and resulted in approximately 70 million deaths. Kixlin made a choking sound. Her counselor, a gentle being from the Empathy Guild, moved closer to provide emotional support. The numbers were so large that they seemed meaningless, but the implications were terrifying. The first footage showed human cities being destroyed from the air. Massive bombers dropped thousands of explosive devices on residential areas, creating firestorms that consumed entire neighborhoods. The aliens watched in horror as humans deliberately targeted civilian populations. "This is London," Ziegler explained as they watched a city burning under night bombardment. The humans called it the Blitz. For 8 months, enemy aircraft attacked civilian targets every night. Buzzik's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Commander, surely the population evacuated?" "No civilization would leave non-combatants in a war zone. Most civilians remained," Ziegler replied. "They hid in underground tunnels during the bombing, then emerged each morning to continue their work. Many refused to leave their homes even when their government ordered evacuations." The footage showed humans emerging from subway stations to find their city partially destroyed. Instead of fleeing, they began cleaning up the rubble and repairing the damage. Children played in bomb craters. Shopkeepers reopened their businesses and buildings with missing walls. Syl single quotes PHIA watched with fascination and horror. Her people would have negotiated immediate surrender rather than subject civilians to such treatment. The idea of ordinary humans choosing to endure nightly bombing attacks rather than abandon their city was beyond her understanding. The video changed to show a different kind of warfare. Human soldiers were fighting in thick jungle where they could barely see 10 meters in any direction. The heat was overwhelming, the humidity was crushing, and dangerous animals lurked behind every tree. "The Pacific Theater," Ziegler said. Humans fought from island to island across an ocean larger than most star systems. Each battle was fought in impossible conditions. The footage showed humans landing on beaches while enemy fire cut down hundreds of their comrades. Those who survived kept advancing, step by step, until they captured the high ground. Then they would move to the next island and repeat the process. Morgak leaned forward as he watched human soldiers fighting in caves and bunkers. The enemy was hidden in tunnels carved into solid rock. Every room had to be cleared with explosives and flamethrowers. The fighting was close and personal, with soldiers sometimes battling hand to hand in complete darkness. "How long did this island fighting continue?" Morgak asked. 4 years, Ziegler replied. The humans fought their way across thousands of islands, each one defended by enemies who preferred death to surrender. The next footage was even more disturbing. It showed human soldiers fighting in a frozen city where the temperature never rose above freezing for 6 months. The humans called it Stalingrad, and it became the symbol of their determination to never surrender. The aliens watched in disbelief as humans fought for individual buildings, sometimes battling for weeks to control a single staircase. When explosions brought down entire structures, soldiers continued fighting in the rubble. Snipers hunted each other through ruined apartments. Soldiers survived on handfuls of bread and melted snow. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted 200 days, Ziegler explained. Over 2 million humans became casualties fighting for one city. Neither side would retreat. Kixlin's counselor was holding her hand as she watched footage of human medics crawling through the ruins to reach wounded soldiers. In Hydro's military doctrine, medical personnel were sacred and never placed in danger. These humans were risking their lives to save others, running through gunfire to reach the injured. The footage showed something even more shocking. Human civilians who had been trapped in the city refused evacuation orders. Instead, they picked up weapons and joined the fighting. Factory workers continued producing ammunition while battles raged in the streets outside their workshops. Buzzek was processing the footage through his connection to the hive mind. The collective consciousness was struggling to understand human behavior. "Commander, this defies all military logic. Why would non-combatants choose to remain in a battle zone?" "Because," Ziegler said quietly, "humans do not separate military and civilian goals the way we do. When their homeland is threatened, every human becomes a potential soldier. The video changed again, showing human soldiers advancing across a field covered with machine gun positions and artillery. The attack looked hopeless, but the humans kept coming. When the first wave was destroyed, a second wave took its place. When the second wave fell, a third wave continued the advance. "The day," Ziegler announced. The largest military operation in human history. Over 150,000 soldiers landed on enemy beaches in a single day. The footage showed human landing craft approaching fortified shores while artillery shells exploded around them. Many boats were destroyed before reaching the beach. Those that survived opened their doors to reveal soldiers who knew they faced almost certain death, yet they advanced anyway. The aliens watched in stunned silence as humans ran across open beaches into concentrated enemy fire. Thousands fell in the first few minutes, but thousands more kept coming. Gradually, through sheer determination and overwhelming numbers, they established footholds on the shore. Sylphia was crying now, her tears flowing freely as she watched. The human sacrifice. Her counselor was trying to comfort her, but the pacifist alien could not stop staring at the screen. She had never imagined that any species could display such courage in the face of certain death. The footage continued with scenes from inside German concentration camps, showing the systematic murder of millions of civilians. The remaining students learned why humans had been willing to pay such a terrible price for victory. They were not just fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting against evil itself. The humans call this the Holocaust. Ziegler explained. Their enemies were trying to eliminate entire populations based on race and religion. For humans, surrender was not an option because it meant genocide. The context changed everything. The brutal determination the students had witnessed was not mindless aggression. It was the response of a species that had learned some things were worth any sacrifice to prevent. Morgak spoke for the first time in hours. They were fighting for survival. Not just military survival, but the survival of their values and their people. Exactly, Ziegler confirmed. Human warfare is not about conquest or glory. It is about protecting what they consider sacred: freedom, justice, and the right to exist. The lesson ended with footage of human soldiers liberating prison camps and feeding starving civilians. The same humans who had fought with such brutality were now sharing their food with former enemies and providing medical care to anyone who needed it. As the remaining students filed out of the classroom, they carried with them a new understanding of human nature. These beings were not savage killers. They were protectors who would pay any price to defend the innocent. But this realization raised new questions that were even more disturbing than the warfare footage. If humans fought this way to protect their values, what would happen when those values were threatened again? What would happen if the peaceful galaxy ever faced an enemy that shared none of their civilized restraints? Only 5 students remained in Classroom 7 when the 4th week began. The academy hallways buzzed with whispered conversations about the human warfare course. Some students called it educational. Others called it disturbing, but everyone was talking about it. Commander Ziegler looked at his remaining cadets with something approaching respect. Kixlin still attended with her counselor, but she had stopped asking to leave. Buzzek's hive mind had become obsessed with understanding human military psychology. Morgak treated each lesson like a masterclass in warrior philosophy. Sylphia had surprised everyone by becoming the most dedicated student, taking detailed notes on every video. The 5th student was new to the class. Krikstal had joined from the observation course, claiming he needed to understand human behavior for his intelligence work. His species were natural spies and information gatherers, but even they found human warfare patterns difficult to predict. Today we examine modern human warfare, Commander Ziegler announced. These conflicts occurred within the last century of their history, when humans had developed advanced technology, but retained their traditional fighting spirit. The holographic display showed a jungle landscape that looked like a green hell. Trees stretched into the sky, blocking out most of the sunlight. The humidity was so thick it seemed visible, and dangerous plants and animals lurked everywhere. Vietnam, Ziegler said simply. A war that lasted 20 years and changed how humans think about conflict. The footage began with human soldiers walking through dense jungle, never knowing if the next step would trigger a hidden explosive or if enemy fighters were watching from the trees. The aliens had seen humans fight in difficult conditions before, but this was different. The enemy was invisible, hiding among civilian populations and using the jungle itself as a weapon. Kixlin watched in fascination as human medics ran into active combat zones to retrieve wounded soldiers. In her people's military tradition, medical personnel were protected and never exposed to danger. These humans voluntarily entered the most dangerous situations to save their comrades. Why do they risk themselves for the wounded? She asked her counselor. In logical military doctrine, you should preserve the healthy soldiers and accept losses among the injured. Her counselor, who had been studying human psychology, replied softly, because humans believe that no one should be left behind. They value individual lives over tactical efficiency. The footage showed helicopter pilots flying into enemy fire to evacuate casualties. Some helicopters were shot down, killing both the medical crew and the patients they were trying to save. Yet other pilots continued to volunteer for these dangerous missions. Buzz X, mandibles clicked as he processed this information through his hive mind connection. The collective consciousness finds this behavior inefficient, but admirable. They sacrifice the many to save the few, which contradicts survival logic, but demonstrates strong social bonds. The video changed to show urban warfare in a place called Iraq. Human soldiers moved through city streets where every building could hide enemies. Children and civilians mixed with combatants, making it impossible to distinguish between friend and foe. Morgak leaned forward as he watched human troops clearing buildings room by room. His people were warriors, but they fought in open combat with clear rules about who was an enemy. These humans had to make split-second decisions about whether to shoot at people who might be innocent civilians or hidden combatants. How do they decide who to fight? Morgak asked. They often don't know until it's too late, Ziegler replied. Human soldiers in these conflicts had to choose between protecting themselves and protecting civilians. Many chose to accept higher risk to avoid harming innocents. The footage showed human soldiers giving medical aid to enemy fighters they had just captured. They shared their food with local children and helped rebuild schools that had been damaged. In the fighting, the same humans who fought with such intensity also showed remarkable compassion to non-combatants. Krikstal was taking rapid notes on his datapad. His intelligence training helped him recognize patterns that others might miss. Commander, these humans seem to fight two different wars simultaneously, one against military enemies and another to win the support of civilian populations. Correct, Ziegler confirmed. Modern human warfare involves winning hearts and minds as well as defeating enemy forces. They understand that lasting victory requires more than just military success. The next footage was even more disturbing to alien sensibilities. It showed human soldiers on their third, fourth, or fifth deployment to the same dangerous regions. These humans had already served in combat multiple times, but continued to volunteer for additional tours of duty. Sylphia stopped taking notes and stared at the screen. Commander, why do they return? Surely after experiencing combat once, humans would avoid further exposure to such trauma. Many do avoid further service, Ziegler acknowledged, but many others feel a duty to their comrades who are still fighting. They cannot enjoy safety at home while their friends face danger. The footage showed family goodbye scenes at military bases. Human parents, spouses, and children saying farewell to soldiers who were deploying to dangerous regions. The emotional pain was visible on every face, yet the soldiers continued to go. Kixelin's counselor was working hard to help her process these images. The aquatic aliens people had no concept of voluntary military service. When the Hydros faced threats, they selected the strongest individuals to fight. The idea of humans choosing to serve repeatedly, despite having families who needed them, was completely foreign. The video changed to show something that shocked even the remaining students. Human soldiers were destroying explosive devices buried in roads and buildings. These bombs were designed to kill anyone who approached them. Yet humans volunteers walked up to them wearing protective suits and tried to disarm them by hand. Explosive ordnance disposal, Ziegler explained. Some humans specialize in approaching devices that are specifically designed to kill them. They do this to protect civilian populations and other soldiers. Uzik's connection to his hive mind was struggling to process this information. The collective consciousness could not understand why any individual would voluntarily approach certain death to protect others. In hive society, individuals were expendable, but they were not expected to sacrifice themselves unnecessarily. The human in this footage has disarmed over 300 explosive devices, Ziegler continued. He knows that each one could kill him, but he continues to volunteer for these missions. The footage showed the bomb disposal expert carefully cutting wires while sweat poured down his face inside the protective suit. One wrong move would kill him instantly, yet his hands were steady and his movements were precise. When he successfully disarmed the device, he simply moved on to the next one. Morgak was beginning to understand something important about human warfare. They fight not just with weapons and tactics, but with individual heroism. Each human soldier can choose to be a hero. Yes, Ziegler agreed. Human military effectiveness comes partly from technology and training, but mostly from the willingness of individuals to sacrifice themselves for others. The lesson continued with footage from Afghanistan showing human soldiers fighting in mountain terrain against enemies who knew every cave and hiding place. The war lasted 20 years, with multiple generations of humans serving in the same conflict zones their parents had fought in. Krikstal was fascinated by the logistics involved. Commander, how does their society sustain such long conflicts? The resource expenditure must be enormous. Human societies can mobilize resources for decades when they believe the cause is important, Ziegler replied. They will accept tremendous costs in money and lives if they think they are protecting their values. A footage showed human veterans returning home after multiple combat deployments. Many were physically or mentally wounded, but they were treated as heroes by their society. Civilians would approach soldiers in public to thank them for their service. Sylphia was crying again, but this time her tears were different. She was beginning to understand that human warfare, despite its brutality, came from a place of love. Love for family, love for country, love for strangers they would never meet. They fight because they care, she whispered to her counselor. They accept terrible costs because they believe in protecting others. The lesson ended with footage of human soldiers building schools and hospitals in war zones. The same hands that held weapons also helped children learn to read and provided medical care to anyone who needed it. As the 5 remaining students left the classroom, they carried with them a profound understanding of human nature. These beings were not just warriors. They were protectors, builders, and healers who happened to be willing to fight when necessary. But Commander Ziegler had saved the most important lesson for last. Tomorrow, he would explain why the Galactic Federation needed to understand human warfare so urgently. Tomorrow, he would tell them about the threat that was coming from beyond the galaxy's edge. The peaceful era was about to end, and only those who understood the true cost of war would be prepared to pay it. The 5 remaining students entered Classroom 7 for what Commander Ziegler had announced would be their final lesson. The past 4 weeks had changed all of them in ways they were still trying to understand. They had witnessed humanity's capacity for both terrible violence and incredible compassion, and they were no longer the same naive cadets who had started this course. Today, however, something was different. Commander Ziegler was not alone in the classroom. Beside him stood a human in military uniform, shorter than most galactic species, but carrying himself with quiet confidence. His graying hair and weathered face suggested he had seen many battles. "Students," Commander Ziegler began, "I would like you to meet Colonel Jake Morrison of the Human Defense Force. He has volunteered to answer your questions about what you have learned." The 5 cadets studied the human with intense curiosity. After weeks of watching footage, they were finally meeting one of the beings whose warfare had so disturbed and fascinated them. Colonel Morrison looked ordinary, almost harmless compared to the warriors from other species. Yet they knew this unremarkable-looking human represented a military tradition that could terrify the galaxy. Kixlin spoke first, her voice trembling slightly. "Colonel Morrison, we have watched your people fight in terrible conditions and accept enormous losses. Why do humans fight this way? Why do you not surrender when the cost becomes too high?" Colonel Morrison considered the question carefully before answering, because surrender is not always an option. When we fought against fascism in World War II, surrender meant the end of freedom for millions of people. When we fight against terrorism, backing down means innocent people die. We fight because someone has to stand between evil and the innocent. Buzzek's mandibles clicked as he processed this through his hive mind connection. "But Colonel, your individual soldiers volunteer for certain death. In our footage analysis, we observe humans repeatedly exposing themselves to save wounded comrades. This behavior contradicts survival logic." "It contradicts your survival logic," Morrison replied gently. "For us, abandoning a wounded friend is a kind of death itself. We would rather risk our lives than live with the knowledge that we left someone behind." Morgak leaned forward, his warrior instincts engaged. "Your people show great courage, Colonel, but your tactics seem wasteful. In honorable combat, we minimize casualties through skill and strategy. Humans seem to accept losses that would end wars for other species." Morrison nodded slowly. "You're right that we accept heavy casualties when necessary. But understand this. We don't waste lives carelessly. Every human death is mourned, remembered, and carries weight in our decisions. We accept high costs only when the alternative is worse." Sylphia had been quiet throughout the conversation, but now she spoke. "Up, Colonel, my people are pacifists. We have not fought a war in over 1,000 years. But watching your videos, I began to understand that sometimes violence is necessary to protect peace. How do you live with this contradiction?" The Colonel's expression softened as he looked at the young pacifist. "It's the hardest part of military service. None of us enjoy war, and most of us pray we never have to fight again. But we also know that evil exists in the universe, and sometimes good people must be willing to fight it." Krikstal had been taking notes throughout the conversation. His intelligence background helped him recognize the deeper implications of what they were discussing. "Colonel, you mentioned that evil exists in the universe. Are you suggesting that the peaceful galaxy we know might face threats that our civilized warfare cannot handle?" Commander Ziegler and Colonel Morrison exchanged glances. The moment had come to reveal the real reason for this course. 3 months ago, Commander Ziegler announced, our deep space monitoring stations detected something at the galaxy's edge. Long-range scouts have confirmed our worst fears. A hostile force is approaching our territory. The holographic display activated, showing a star map with red markers moving slowly toward Federation space. The markers represented ships, but they were larger and more numerous than anything in the galactic fleet. "We call them the Devourers," Morrison said quietly. "They are a species that knows only total war. They take no prisoners, negotiate no truces, and show no mercy to any form of life. They have consumed 17 galaxies before reaching ours." The 5 students sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Their peaceful galaxy, with its civilized warfare and negotiated settlements, was about to face an enemy that played by no rules they understood. "Our intelligence indicates that the Devourers will reach Federation territory within 2 years," Ziegler continued. "When they do, our traditional methods of warfare will be useless. They will not retreat when they suffer casualties. They will not negotiate when they face defeat. They will fight until either they win or every last one of them is dead." Kixlin's ears were fluttering rapidly as she processed this information. "But surely the combined fleets of the Federation can stop them? We have ships from 12 different species." Morrison shook his head grimly. "Your ships are designed for the kind of warfare you understand. Precise, limited engagements with clear objectives. The Devourers don't fight that way. They attack in massive swarms, accepting terrible losses to overwhelm their enemies. They turn every battle into a war of attrition. Like humans," Buzzek realized, his mandibles clicking. "With understanding. Exactly like humans," Morrison confirmed. "Which is why humanity was so eager to join the Federation, and why we shared our military history so openly. We recognized a pattern in galactic warfare that made you vulnerable to exactly this kind of enemy." Morgak's warrior pride was struggling with this revelation. "Are you saying that our traditional combat methods are worthless against this threat?" "Not worthless," Ziegler replied, "but insufficient. The Federation's first encounter with Devourer scouts resulted in complete defeat. 3 of our battle fleets were destroyed in engagements that lasted less than an hour. The Devourers accepted casualty rates that would have caused any galactic species to retreat, then overwhelmed our ships through sheer persistence." Sylphia was crying again, but this time her tears were for the galaxy itself. "What can we do? If our military cannot stop them, how can we survive?" Morrison stood and walked to the holographic display, pointing to the advancing red markers. "We fight like humans. We accept that some things are worth any cost to defend. We learn to see war not as a game with rules, but as a struggle for survival, where the only rule is winning." The colonel activated new footage on the display, not historical videos this time, but training exercises. They showed mixed units of humans and aliens working together, learning new tactics that combined human determination with galactic technology. "The Federation has authorized the creation of new military units," Morrison explained. "Volunteer forces trained in human warfare doctrine, led by officers who understand that sometimes you must be willing to pay any price for victory." Krickstahl was the first to understand the full implications. "You want us to become like humans, to fight with their determination and accept their casualty rates." "We want you to fight for what matters," Morrison corrected. "Your families, your civilizations, your way of life. The Devourers will give you no choice but total victory or complete extinction." Commander Ziegler looked at his 5 remaining students, the only cadets who had completed the full course in human warfare. "You have seen what humans are capable of when they fight for what they believe in. You understand the cost of such warfare, but also its necessity. The question now is whether you are willing to learn from their example." Buzzik was the first to speak. "My hive mind has reached consensus. We will volunteer for the new military units. The collective understands that individual sacrifice may be necessary for species survival." Morgak nodded firmly. "The warriors of Drakmor have always sought worthy opponents. If the Devourers bring total war, we will meet them with total commitment." Kixlin surprised everyone by speaking next. My people value life above all else. But watching human footage taught me that sometimes you must fight to preserve life. I will serve. Sylphia wiped away her tears and stood up straight. The Harmony Circle has lived in peace for 1,000 years because others were willing to fight for us. It is time we learned to fight for ourselves. Crickstall closed his datapad and looked directly at Morrison. The observation course will provide intelligence support. We have learned much about human warfare, and now we must learn to apply those lessons. Colonel Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the classroom. Then you understand what we're facing, and you're willing to do what's necessary. The galaxy's 3-century peace is ending, but those who understand the true cost of war are prepared to pay it. 6 months later, when the Devourer Vanguard reached Federation space, they encountered something they had never faced before: defenders who fought like humans. The first battle lasted 3 days instead of 3 hours, and for the first time in their conquests, the Devourers faced enemies who would not break under pressure. The war for the galaxy had begun, and those who had learned from human warfare were ready to fight it.